The night air trembled with thunder as Emily clenched her fists, her breath ragged, heart pounding like a war drum. Emily said, "I will not let them bury me in silence anymore." Her scream pierced the storm, echoing against the narrow alley walls. Rain poured down, soaking her blouse as flashes of lightning revealed her eyes blazing with rage. She had endured years of whispers, dismissals, and the quiet cruelty of being overlooked. Tonight was different. A betrayal at work had cracked her restraint, exposing a fire she had long tried to smother. She remembered her father's words, "Silence can be dignity, but it can also be a cage." Her body shook, not from the cold, but from the fury erupting within. Emily said, "If the world wants to break me, then it will feel me break back." Her voice, usually fragile, cut the storm like steel. The streetlight flickered, casting jagged shadows on crumbling brick. For the first time in years, she felt alive, though trembling on the edge of despair. A storm within and without, both demanding to be heard. The storm passed, leaving Emily shivering in soaked clothes, her breath ragged in the night air. Emily said, "They think I'll bow, but I will not." The silence after her scream was louder than thunder. She remembered the boardroom that afternoon, the cutting words of her superior. Emily said, "You'll never be more than a shadow." Those words struck deeper than any storm. She thought of every time her voice had been dismissed, every moment she swallowed her truth. Tonight, the pain became fuel. Emily walked forward, her shoes squelching on the flooded pavement. A passing car sprayed her legs with dirty water, but she didn't flinch. She whispered to herself, "I'll rise, even if it breaks me." Her heart steadied, her breath calmed, her eyes sharpened. For the first time, fear felt small. Emily reached her apartment, her body heavy with fatigue, but her mind sharper than ever. She slammed the door, peeling off her wet jacket, heart racing with images of betrayal. Emily said, "They humiliated me, but they will see me rise." The small room smelled of damp wood, the hum of an old heater barely warming the air. She collapsed onto the couch, staring at the cracked ceiling. The silence weighed on her shoulders like a second storm. She remembered her mother's tired eyes, always warning her not to stand out, not to risk too much. Emily whispered, "I can't live invisible anymore." The words hung in the room, fragile but determined. The storm outside softened to drizzle, but Emily's storm inside refused to fade. She replayed the moment at work, the superior's cold voice, the room's cruel laughter. Emily said, "You've got no place at this table." Each word was a wound. She clenched her jaw, her hands gripping the couch arm. She wanted to scream again, but instead her eyes welled with tears she fought to hold back. Emily said, "They can laugh, but I won't stay broken." The quiet hum of the heater mixed with her shaky breaths. She pulled a notebook from the table, the blank page waiting like a challenge. Her pen trembled, then she began to write, each stroke fueled by fury. The words spilled onto paper, jagged and raw, each sentence cutting like a blade. Emily wrote about injustice, betrayal, and silence forced upon her for years. She wrote about dignity, stolen, and strength discovered in pain. Emily whispered, "This is my war cry." Her hand cramped, but she didn't stop. The notebook filled with ink-stained defiance, her heart hammering with every line. She felt as though the storm outside had moved inside her pen, lightning striking with each phrase. When she finally stopped, the page glowed under the lamp, alive with truth. Emily said, "Tomorrow, they will hear me." Morning light crept into the apartment, pale and cold, as Emily stared at her notebook filled with words that burned like fire. She whispered, "This is my armor now." Her reflection in the cracked mirror seemed foreign, her eyes sharper, lips trembling with resolve. She pulled on her worn blazer, each button fastening like a vow. The city roared outside with traffic, horns, and hurried footsteps, but she moved with deliberate calm. As she walked toward the office, the memory of laughter in the boardroom tightened her chest. Emily said, "They will not see me bend again." Each step through the crowded streets was a rebellion, a reminder that her silence was gone. The sky was heavy with gray clouds, but her spirit sparked with quiet defiance. The office buzzed with low chatter and clattering keyboards, but Emily's arrival stirred no notice. She slipped past colleagues, their eyes fixed on screens, their laughter still echoing in her head from yesterday's humiliation. She held her gaze forward, refusing to shrink. At her desk, the papers felt heavier than usual, each one a weight pressing her back into obscurity. Emily said not anymore. She drew a slow breath, steadying her shaking hands. The fluorescent lights above hummed, casting pale shadows that deepened her resolve. Every keystroke she typed became louder in her mind, each letter defiance against the silence they wanted for her. Across the room, Daniel noticed her. He was 32, sharp-eyed, with a cynical smirk that rarely left his face. He had watched Emily for years, never close, but always aware. Daniel leaned against the cubicle wall, arms crossed, his tone cutting. Daniel said, "You look like someone who finally decided to stop hiding." Emily glanced at him, startled, her lips tightening. Emily said, "Maybe I have." The honesty of her voice surprised even herself. Daniel tilted his head, his eyes narrowing with reluctant respect. Daniel said, "About time. Shadows don't win wars." The words stung but also sparked something she hadn't felt before. Acknowledgement. Emily sat frozen, Daniel's blunt words still cutting through her defenses. He wasn't kind, but he was unflinchingly honest. Emily whispered, "Shadows don't win wars." The phrase lingered in her chest like an echo. She thought of her mother's warning to stay silent, to survive unnoticed, and how Daniel's challenge mocked that survival. Daniel leaned closer, his voice lower but just as sharp. Daniel said, "If you want them to stop walking over you, you have to make them trip." She flinched at the imagery, her pulse quickening. For the first time, she felt someone believed she had more to give, even if he wrapped it in thorns. The day dragged forward, each moment at her desk weighed by Daniel's challenge. She scribbled notes furiously in the margins of her reports, each word carrying more bite than before. Emily said, "I will not stay small." She remembered the storm, her scream echoing in the alley, and felt the same fire simmer beneath her skin. The office noise blurred into static, her world narrowing to her pen, her pulse, and the determination swelling in her chest. She looked across at Daniel, who had already turned back to his work, pretending not to notice her. She whispered, "Maybe you're right." The words, quiet but fierce, marked a turning point she couldn't step back from. The week moved forward with tension, each day pulling Emily deeper into the current of conflict. Her reports were dismissed again in the meeting, the manager barely glancing at her work before passing it aside. Emily said, "This isn't an accident anymore." Her voice carried, but no one turned, their eyes sliding past her like she was air. The humiliation burned hotter than the storm she had faced. She tightened her jaw, fingers clutching the table edge. Across the room, Daniel caught her eye, his raised brow daring her to fight. She thought of the notebook at home, her war cry inked across its pages. She whispered under her breath, "I will not stay silent." The moment passed, but her heart refused to let it fade. After the meeting, Emily stood in the hallway, her chest heaving, anger and shame swirling. Daniel approached, his steps casual but his words sharp. Daniel said, "You let them cut you down again." She glared at him, fury flashing. Emily said, "You think it's that simple?" Daniel shrugged, his smirk thin but knowing. Daniel said, "It's not simple. It's necessary." His words cut, but beneath the sting was truth. She realized her silence gave them power. The hallway seemed to close in around her, voices echoing like ghosts of every dismissal. Emily whispered, "Not anymore." The vow tasted bitter but firm. That evening, Emily walked home through the city, neon lights reflecting off rain-slicked pavement. Each step replayed the meeting's cruelty, every glance of dismissal carved into her. She stopped at a storefront window, her reflection staring back, soaked in shadows and light. Emily said, "They will not define me." Her voice cracked but carried conviction. She pressed her palm to the cold glass, as though reaching for the version of herself who had stayed silent too long. She felt the storm return inside her, each heartbeat a thunderclap demanding action. She whispered again, stronger this time, I will rise. Inside her apartment, Emily tore open her notebook again, the pages already heavy with her pain. She wrote furiously, her pen scratching until the ink smeared her fingers. Emily said, every word they used against me will be my weapon. She filled the page with sharp declarations, sentences forged from her rage and resolve. Her body shook as if lightning flowed from pen to paper. The lamp's warm glow lit her determined face, every line etched with fire. She whispered, this is how I'll fight them. Her hand trembled, not from fear, but from strength finally unleashed. Days later, tension peaked again. In another meeting, Emily's ideas were dismissed before she could finish. This time, her pulse thundered and her voice cut through the room. Emily said, you will not ignore me anymore. Silence fell, the room stunned. The manager froze, his smirk faltering, while colleagues shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Daniel leaned back, a shadow of a smile flickering, his eyes locked on hers with quiet respect. Emily's body trembled, but her voice held steady. The silence that followed was no longer her cage, it was their reckoning. The next meeting struck Emily harder than any before. Her ideas were cut mid-sentence, her manager's voice dripping with disdain. Manager said, stay in your lane, Emily. The room erupted in quiet laughter. Her chest tightened, shame choking her words. Her pen slipped from her fingers, clattering against the polished table like a final blow. Emily said, I can't keep fighting shadows. The silence inside her grew deafening, louder than their cruel snickers. She wanted to rise, but her body refused, pinned by humiliation. Daniel's eyes caught hers across the table, unblinking, but she turned away. The storm inside her cracked, and for the first time she felt herself breaking. She rushed into the restroom, gripping the sink as tears blurred her reflection in the cracked mirror. Emily said, why can't I ever be enough? Her voice echoed against the tiles, trembling with defeat. The water ran as she splashed her face, trying to wash away the sting of shame. Her reflection stared back, broken eyes rimmed with red. A woman unrecognizable to herself. She thought of her father's words, silence can be dignity. But now they felt like chains. Emily said, I'm drowning in their voices. The weight pressed against her chest, suffocating, while outside the muffled sound of laughter reminded her of her failure. Later that night, Emily walked home alone, the city blurring around her under relentless rain. Her shoes splashed through puddles, clothes soaked, but she felt numb. Neon light smeared across her wet face as tears blended with the rain. She whispered, I don't belong anywhere. Her voice was fragile, almost lost in the storm. Cars passed, spraying her legs with filthy water, but she didn't flinch. Each step felt heavier than the last, dragging her deeper into despair. The storm outside mirrored the storm inside, each droplet echoing her fractured spirit. She thought of giving up, of surrendering to silence forever. Emily collapsed onto her couch, soaked clothes dripping onto the worn fabric, body shivering from cold and despair. She stared at her notebook on the table, but tonight it mocked her. Emily said, what's the point? Her words broke in the empty room, hollow and small. She pressed her hands to her face, sobs tearing through her chest. The lamp flickered as if mocking her too, shadows stretching long across the peeling wallpaper. She felt the weight of every dismissal, every cruel laugh, pressing down until breathing itself became unbearable. Emily whispered, maybe I am nothing after all. Her hands shook, not with fury this time, but with defeat. The next day, Emily entered the office hollow-eyed, her spirit dimmed. Whispers floated behind her back, colleagues smirking as she walked by. Every step toward her desk felt like a funeral march. Daniel watched from across the room, his expression unreadable. She sat down slowly, hands trembling on the keyboard, but no words came. The sound of laughter echoed again, slicing through her fragile silence. Emily said, I can't keep this up, though her lips barely moved. Her body sagged, shoulders caved, as if the world had finally won. For the first time she felt invisible not just to them, but to herself. The office air felt heavy that morning, whispers buzzing like flies as Emily walked in. She sensed something different in the room. Papers scattered across desks carried her name. Emily froze when she saw the leaked emails projected on the meeting screen. They revealed her manager's scheme, proof of deliberate sabotage, credit stolen from her work for months. Colleagues gasped, eyes wide with disbelief. Emily whispered, "It was never me. It was always him." Her body trembled, not from fear, but from the shock of truth exposed. Daniel's gaze met hers across the room, his nod subtle but certain. The manager stammered, his voice shaking as excuses spilled like broken glass. Manager said, "This is being taken out of context." But the words sounded hollow against the projected truth. Emily's chest rose with fire, years of silence collapsing under the weight of revelation. She stood slowly, her chair scraping against the floor with finality. Emily said, "You built your throne on my work." Her voice cracked with pain but held steel beneath. The room fell silent, every eye now on her. Daniel leaned forward, his smirk gone, his eyes sharpened in approval. Emily's storm was no longer invisible, it was undeniable. Emily's voice grew steadier, each word burning through the silence. Emily said, "You told me I didn't belong. You laughed when I tried. But you needed my voice all along." Her colleagues looked at her differently now, no longer with dismissal, but with dawning respect. The manager's face darkened, his mask slipping, anger exposing his desperation. He slammed his hand on the table, but the sound echoed hollow, powerless. Daniel's eyes flickered with pride as Emily stood taller than ever before. She whispered, "I was never a shadow." Her words carved into the room, undeniable and final. The manager lunged forward, his voice raised, desperate to reclaim control. Manager said, "No one will believe you." But the evidence glared from the screen, undeniable, exposing his lies. Emily felt a calm she had never known, a storm settling into clarity. She said, "They already do." Her words cut deeper than any shout. Daniel rose from his seat, his presence adding weight to her stance. The colleagues, once indifferent, now shifted, their silence speaking volumes. For the first time, Emily wasn't fighting alone. The truth itself fought with her. The meeting ended not with applause, but with silence heavy as stone. The manager stormed out, his authority shattered, leaving behind a trail of disbelief. Emily sat slowly, her body trembling from the weight of release. Daniel approached, his voice low but sharp. Daniel said, "Now they see you." Emily exhaled, tears mixing with the faintest smile. She said, "I see me too." The words tasted like freedom, like rain after drought. The storm had broken, and for the first time, she stood in her own light, unshaken by their shadows. The boardroom was tense, air thick with unspoken conflict. Emily entered, her steps steady, notebook clutched in her hand like a blade. Manager smirked, his confidence unshaken despite the evidence already exposed. Manager said, "This will pass. They'll forget." Emily's jaw tightened, her storm no longer hidden. She said, "No, they won't. Not this time." The colleagues shifted uneasily, their eyes darting between her and the man who had ruled them for years. Daniel leaned back, arms crossed, watching his silence a challenge. Emily planted the notebook on the table, her heart pounding, but her voice unwavering. Emily opened the notebook, her words spilling like fire, each sentence a wound exposed. Emily said, "These are my ideas, my work, my voice." She read with strength, each phrase cutting through the silence, undeniable proof of her stolen credit. The manager's face tightened, his composure cracking. He barked, "This is insubordination," but his voice faltered, drowned by her unwavering tone. Daniel smirked faintly, his eyes lit with rare admiration. For the first time, Emily felt the weight of the room shift, not against her, but for her. Her voice, once fragile, now filled every corner. The manager slammed his hand on the table, voice rising. Manager said, "You think this changes anything? You are nothing without me." His words echoed, desperate and hollow. Emily's body trembled, but not from fear. She stepped forward, eyes locked on him, her voice ablade. Emily said, "No, I was everything you needed, and you were nothing without me." Gasps filled the room, the colleagues stunned by her defiance. Daniel's smirk disappeared, replaced with solemn approval. Emily stood taller, the years of silence falling away like chains breaking. Silence followed, heavy and undeniable. Emily's chest heaved, her pulse roaring like thunder, but her gaze never wavered. The manager slumped back into his chair, his authority unraveling in front of them all. Emily said, "I am done being erased." Her words rang like a verdict, final and absolute. Daniel rose from his chair, his movements slow, deliberate, adding weight to her stance. For once, the colleagues didn't laugh or dismiss. They sat in reverent silence, acknowledging her as they never had before. The storm inside Emily had broken free, not destructive, but cleansing. The confrontation ended not with shouting, but with Emily's quiet strength filling the room. She turned from the manager, her voice steady. Emily said, "This is my place now." She sat slowly, her notebook resting before her like a crown reclaimed. The colleagues, once blind to her, now watched with newfound recognition. Daniel approached after the meeting, his voice low but firm. Daniel said, "You've finally taken it." Emily exhaled, a smile ghosting her lips. Emily said, "I didn't take it. I claimed what was mine." The storm had passed, but the fire remained, a flame that would never dim. Days later, Emily walked through the city streets at dawn, the storm replaced by a soft golden sunrise. Each step felt lighter, as though the burden of silence had finally lifted. She whispered, "I am not invisible anymore." Her reflection in the store windows no longer looked like a stranger, it looked like a woman reborn. The faces of colleagues flashed in her mind, some still doubting, others silently respecting, but none could deny her anymore. She carried no arrogance, only quiet strength. The hum of the waking city rose around her, but her heart felt still, steady, unshakable. Back at the office, the atmosphere shifted when Emily entered. The whispers had quieted, the stares less mocking, more cautious. She walked to her desk with unhurried steps, head high. Emily said, "Respect isn't given, it's taken." She sat and opened her notebook, the ink-stained pages now a living record of her battle. Daniel passed by, pausing briefly, his eyes meeting hers. Daniel said, still standing. Emily smiled faintly. Emily said, "Always." His smirk returned, but this time it carried respect. For the first time, her desk no longer felt like a cage, but like her ground of strength. In the boardroom again, she stood where she once trembled. This time, the silence belonged to her, not to her manager's disdain. Emily said, "Your dismissal no longer defines me." Her colleagues listened, the room charged with her voice alone. The weight of her words pressed into every corner of the room. She didn't shout, but her calm was louder than any storm. Daniel leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing in satisfaction. Emily said, "I am done being overlooked." The silence that followed was reverent, not cruel, her presence undeniable. Later, Emily sat in a quiet park, notebook open on her lap, the breeze carrying fallen leaves across the grass. She wrote not of pain, but of growth, each line flowing with clarity. Emily whispered, "This is who I am." Children laughed in the distance, their joy softening her heart. The storm had carved scars, but also strength. Her words were no longer weapons. They were seeds, a promise of resilience for those still silenced. She smiled gently, her chest rising with peace. She said, "My voice is mine, and it will never be caged again." That night, Emily stood at her apartment window, gazing out at the glowing city skyline. Her reflection merged with the lights, no longer blurred, but clear. She whispered, "I fought, I fell, I rose." The journey was carved into her bones. a permanent fire that no storm could ever extinguish. She turned away from the glass, the notebook resting open on her table. Its last page bore her final words. Emily said, "This is my story, and it is only the beginning." She closed the book, her lips curving into a small, resolute smile, as the city pulsed with endless possibility.